for joining us for today's live webinar entitled Data-Driven Content FHIR and the Future of Regulatory Submissions. Today's session is sponsored by Astrix and presented by Gabor, Fari, co-founder and principal of InteliNotion. So we're very happy to have them with us today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Before we get into today's materials, I want to take a moment and just do a quick introduction of who Astrix is. Company snapshot. We were established in 1995, vendor and platform agnostic. What does that mean? Well, we're a consulting company who works in life science, and we help companies choose, implement, and manage all these different types. You can go to the previous slide. All these types of systems, and like the one you're going to hear from today. We operate from locations in the United States and overseas, and over 1,200 employees, and 90% of those are folks who hold advanced science degrees. So we're very proud of that. We're proud of the fact that our consulting company is predominantly made up of science professionals helping other science professionals. And the type of companies that we help are everybody from startups to Fortune 1000, life science enterprise, chemical, CPG, government agencies, and research institutions. So that's just a little bit about who we are. We can go to the next slide, please. And then in terms of the work that we do, we like to say we do end-to-end service offerings that accelerate digital transformation and optimize performance across your ecosystem. That's going to be things like strategic innovation, enterprise architecture. In the very early stages of work that we often do with companies, we're helping them really kind of develop business processes, what user requirements are, application roadmaps, implementation assessments, et cetera, really kind of helping people get their hands around the type of technology they're going to need to drive their business forward. And then help architect that out. What is the overall solution strategy, the integration strategy, the data architecture? From there, we help with selecting the right solutions to round out your technology stack. And from there, we can help with development and implementation. We can help with computer systems validation once that implementation is complete. From there, we can provide a whole host of ongoing application support, as well as even helping to staff your organization, both with IT professionals as well as scientific professionals. So again, a little bit about Astrix. If you're not familiar with us, you are a little bit more familiar with us now. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speaker for today. Gabor is going to be joining us as the co-founder and partner of InteliNotion. Very passionate about solving problems related to enterprise content management, particularly in the life science industry. So I won't go through Gabor's entire bio. He can certainly round that out. And I'm very anxious to obviously sit back with the rest of you and enjoy the presentation. Gabor, I'll be back on at the end to help with questions.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. And yeah, indeed, you can read my bio or you can connect to me on LinkedIn. So I would be happy to chat with you offline as well. But we are here to speak today about data-driven content and FHIR and the future of regulatory submissions. So this is an area, a key area that I'm very passionate about. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today about this topic. So a few words about us as well. After the great introduction by Astrix, InteliNotion is the next generation component and content management platform. It came from our vision to manage content, not just documents. We've been developing it since 2015. We have quite a bit of experience with it now. The platform is used by some of the leading biopharma companies for structured content authoring. Some of the unique features I'd like to mention, it's a Word-based authoring environment. We decided to primarily focus on Word, where our users were. We are born in a cloud company, so we built a platform that's cloud native on Microsoft Azure. We are somewhat agnostic, but we found that some of the capabilities of Azure were best suited for what we plan to deliver, especially with the tight integration with the rest of the Microsoft stack. But the platform is primarily open. It's open, API-driven, extensible, and highly configurable. We believe in configuration over customization. So in fact, customization is a bad word in our vernacular. If a customer requests a feature, we will build it and make it available to other customers as well. Also, important to mention, it's not on the slide, that we are using a dedicated tenant approach. This gives us flexibility and security. So this is also why we're able to run different versions of our software as customers are ready to adopt it. So it's not one size fits all kind of approach. The current R&D focus areas that I'm heavily involved in are Gen AI and AI assisted authoring. We're not prepared to talk about that today, but we will very soon. Digital data flow and data-driven content. That's somewhat related to the topic that we are talking about today, which is next generation content formats. Clearly, we are working on fusing data and content and data-driven documents, but FHIR is a key tool in the arsenal of how we get there. So let me talk about FHIR. FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It's a mouthful, but it really is a standardized framework for sharing medical information between healthcare professionals and organizations. It's actually a fairly new kind of standard in terms of new being when the web became mature. It uses web standards. It was developed by HL7. HL7 is a mature, older organization, and it stands for Health Level 7 International, and they are one of the organizations that develops common standards across the healthcare industry. And FHIR is one of the newer initiatives. Most importantly, FHIR uses modern web technologies and APIs. API is not for active product ingredient. In this case, it's an application programming interface for streamlined data sharing and the improved interoperability. Why does FHIR matter? One of the key deficiencies in the US style healthcare system is the lack of interoperable standards. And what FHIR is meant to do is to bridge that. So it really acts as a connector for instant access to patient information. It facilitates informed decision-making and improved patient care by making patient information available and ubiquitously to healthcare professionals. And most importantly, enables electronic health records to interchange health data. This is a fairly new capability. When you think about it, there's about 3 or 4 major EHRs in the US, and in the past, they never talked to each other. Clearly, the vendors wanted to create closed ecosystems for business reasons, but there's also a need to interoperate data. So today, multiple electronic health record systems can talk to each other, and FHIR is the common language that makes it possible. So some of the benefits, additional benefits of FHIR, again, we talked about patient empowerment a little bit. Patients have access to the medical information, smoother data sharing. It improves clinical treatment by providing the healthcare professionals with the information they need for better treatment and patient outcomes. It's also a cost-effective solution for healthcare organizations due to use of its RESTful web services. RESTful web services is a modern way for web applications to interconnect to each other. When you think of the old days when you had different types of interconnectivity and companies and healthcare providers and large organizations had to build custom connections between 2 different EHRs. It was expensive and fragile, and most importantly, it required a constant and high investment. FHIR is supposed to be the common interface that actually enables fast and smooth health data sharing. So to net it out, what's the geeky stuff about FHIR? It basically contains a robust data model for describing health and administrative data. It uses a RESTful API. Again, this is a web term. REST stands for representational state transfer. It's a modern way for applications to talk to each other over the web using standards such as JSON or XML. I'm sure that XML is familiar to most of you in the audience. JSON, I like to call JSON the XML of the new kids, because most importantly, JSON allows for data in exchange using browser technologies. It can be actually parsed by the browser, so that means it's much easier for modern browsers and web servers to send data to each other. FHIR also contains a set of open source tools to implement and test these applications. They have regular connectathons to connect these applications. There's a collection of FHIR server around the world that applications can interact with. It's the same kind of model as the World Wide Web, where servers talk to each other using a common language and dialect. And it really is, and this is why it stands for fast and interoperable, because it really is a community of implementers working together. So it's not only the technology, but the philosophy of everyone working together to support the standard and interconnecting health data. So, the heritage of FHIR is healthcare for sure. And then we'll talk about how that is morphing into the life sciences industry, which is also healthcare, but very specific. So talking about FHIR resources 101, and what does FHIR really mean? So resources are small and logically discrete units of exchange. You can think of them as Lego blocks. So basically, you can build a large, complex Lego model by using these small elements of it. So resources are the individual elements that make up a complex Lego system. It has they have defined behavior and meaning. They know their identity and location. So in a way, they're self-aware. And the resource is the smallest unit of a transaction. So examples of a resource in the healthcare field could be a patient, a practitioner, an organization, a condition, a health condition, care plan, document, etc. So there was a lot of thought, careful thought put into how to break all this healthcare medical information into discrete units, and which could be thought of in the when we compare it to Lego as building blocks, so Lego blocks, and these are connected to each other. So what does a FHIR resource look like in terms of data? So there's a resource identity and metadata. There's the human readable summary. Making it human readable, of course, was very, very important. So this is both human readable and machine readable. And that's the key here, because humans can read it too. It's not just binary code, but machines can interchange data with each other. There's an extension with a URL to a definition, and there's standard data that was defined by the FHIR standard. So basically, this is what it looks like. So then we can go on to think about how do we build a FHIR solution. So we've already established what resources are, but in order to build a complete FHIR solution that is made up of resources, these resources will need extensions and constraints to build a complete FHIR solution. Again, to go back to the analogy of Lego blocks, the resources by themselves can't connect to each other. So what they need are these little connecting type of widgets, which are extension. And the constraints are basically the rules of how these things work together. And again, back to the Lego blocks, I hope it becomes clear how these things connect to each other and how multiple things can be connected to create a complete, more complex solution. So let's talk about data types. So a single resource might be useful by itself for a given use case, but typical resources do not make up a solution on their own. It's just a single atomic unit of something, of a resource. So for example, there is a medication prescription. As I mentioned to you before, these are tied together, and all of these colored blocks are resources, but there are business rules of how these are tied together. So let's take a more sophisticated case of how does it actually work. So let's take a look at FHIR in practice. Here's a patient encounter example. The patient has some sort of a condition. Patient goes to see a practitioner. The practitioner actually examines the patient. Based on the examination, the caregiver or practitioner determines what the condition of the patient is, prescribes a medicine for that, and based on the observations, of course, and And then this completes the loop. When you look at it, these are all FHIR resources that are tied together to make up a whole. This is, and you can think of this also in terms of the web analogy, since this is essentially web technology based on web technologies. That this is a web. You can think of FHIR as webs of resources. Webs of resources that are tied together, and healthcare interactions between patients and practitioners and other healthcare scenarios can all be described and mapped to FHIR resources. So the entire workflow is described using standard FHIR terminology and FHIR concepts. So let's move on to FHIR in life sciences. There is why FHIR in life sciences, and what does it really mean for the life sciences industry. So there is an HL7 project called the Vulcan. It's an accelerator project. There are several accelerator projects within HL7, but the Vulcan project is particular to life sciences. And why is this important? Because as healthcare came along and FHIR became a standard for exchanging de facto information, the life sciences industry started to become interested in a common standard. There have been other initiatives, other standards in the life sciences industry based on XML technologies. There was all these initiatives of interchanging life sciences data. There are initiatives called CRIX and InfoBroker, et cetera, and they're all sort of balkanized efforts to try to solve the same problem. The life sciences industry became involved with FHIR once it became apparent that this is a standard that can help with a lot of problems. And the whole objective is to connect industry collaboratives, maximize resources, and to start using the FHIR standards also for the life sciences industry. So the purpose was really of the Vulcan projects was to bridge the gaps between clinical care and research and connecting stakeholders in both translational and the clinical research community. The key focus of this is to develop, to leverage common and modern electronic health record standards to optimize clinical studies and beyond. So currently there are a couple of active projects. One is for adverse events reporting. The other is for phenomics exchange, real-world data, electronic medicinal products information, and pharmaceutical quality. There are different stages of adoption right now. So, for example, the EPI project is actually currently in pilot phase with the EMA, and it's actually expected to become a standard next year. Pharmaceutical quality is actually, I think it just passed the ballot stage, but the FDA is already highly interested in adopting it. So when we look at the convening members of Vulcan, so it's HL7. There's Transcelerate Biopharma. Transcelerate is a cross-industry initiative to develop common standards for clinical data. Society for Clinical Data Management, the National Institutes of Health, the FDA. So basically, it's bringing together a number of agencies and industry associations to bring them together or to convene them to actually develop these standards. So the Project Vulcan as an accelerator program has a number of these stakeholders who all have a common interest, which is better care through better data interchange and information exchange. So the current member of the organizations of Vulcan, I will not read the list to you, but it goes all the way from academia, and increasingly large pharma companies are also interested. As a matter of fact, this is the latest slide from the Vulcan website, but it does need updating because there's additional pharma companies who've joined and additional implementers, but it's definitely growing, and there's a growing awareness and interest in FHIR as a common standard for life sciences information exchange. So let's take a look at some of the FHIR areas in practice, for example, labeling. So as I mentioned before, EMA is a European Medicines Agency, and the European Medicines Regulatory Network has adopted a common standard called EPI, which stands for Electronic Product Information. It aims for a global approach to structure medical products, again, based on HL7 standards. And it aims to establish and use technical business rules for API use. And the EPI pilot is going to conclude in July of this year. And based on the outcome of the pilot, it is expected to become a standard, and it's going to go to full implementation. The FDA, who has been using another standard called SPL, for structured product labeling, they're actually starting to think about adopting FHIR, and they're running a pilot currently, May and June. I think it ends at the end of June, to test the FDA's draft implementation guide. So the FDA is trying to see how it can sort of morph the SPL standard into using FHIR standards. Eventually, they want to provide rules for creating electronic submissions and to replace existing SPL-based submissions. This is basically what an EPI looks. So to take an example, this is what an EPI looks like. And what's very interesting, they came up with the concept of a bundle. So the bundles together different FHIR resources. And the bundle, basically a composition resource, is suitable for product information documents. And then a bundle is a new concept, so compositions can refer to other elements. So it's important to know that FHIR is a standard, but in order to make it work practically, these different working groups, for example, with EPI, have built their own standards that make sense for them. So sponsors can compile these submissions, and regulatory agencies can actually receive and consume them. So they introduced the concepts of a composition and a bundle, and it's described on how to do this, but it all uses the common concepts of FHIR. Other examples is the pharmaceutical quality PQ CMC that the FDA is now interested in, and they've tested it in a January Connectathon, and again, I believe it's past the ballot state. It's going to become a next standard following the EPI, and they're already have an implementation guide of how to move quality chemistry CMC. It's called CMC, quality chemistry manufacturing controls data, to the FDA. So FDA is highly interested in also adopting the FHIR standard for their CMC documentation. In general, the trend is to move from document-based submissions to database, data-driven submissions. So there's one more major initiative that's actually not FDA specific, but it's driven by ICH, which is the International Council for Harmonization, which is the new template for protocols. So ICH M11 is a standard for protocols, and it's actually currently being worked on, and they're planning for an adoption of an ICH harmonized guideline by the fall of 2025. I believe the FDA briefed the attendees of the DIRS IDM conference. I believe the FDA is planning starting with a pilot, and by the fall of 2025, they'd like to bring it to an adoption ICH harmonized guideline. So this, very interesting, this is what it looks like. And one of the things I'd like to also mention, my personal opinion, is the more complex data or document is, the more it is also necessary to still support the older legacy standards. So smaller documents, such as a label, it's easier to move to a fully data-driven standard. For very large documents, it takes a lot. I mean, these documents could be hundreds of pages long and contain, in our vernacular, hundreds of components. So it's quite complex. So right now, what the authorities want is actually still support the multiple formats. So they want Microsoft Word docx format, PDF, XML, JSON in FHIR format. So this again comes from the recent DIR SIDM conference, but the key here is to actually start to adopt to more open and data-driven standards, so systems can exchange data with each other. So right now, this is what they're thinking about, and of course, the guidelines are still issued in Microsoft Word, but the idea is that at some point they'd like to receive it in FHIR format. So the one of the areas I wanted to talk to you about is what happens with legacy formats. So at this point, of course, it's looking like Word is a current but also legacy format, and what's going to happen in the future. So the way we view Microsoft Word, given the fact that our platform initially was built on Word, and the overwhelming majority of customers still use Word, we've used Microsoft Word as a versatile platform for rich content creation. And I think the key to adopt standards is for the regulatory authorities to reduce their very strict guidelines regarding formatting and styling, because if you want to focus on data exchange, then the focus should be on data and not the formatting. But right now, those things have not been relaxed or new standards established. Different regulatory agencies have different guidelines for styles, and companies internally also have different very strict guidelines for styling and formatting. So, but we can boil it down to Word as a canvas. It's a versatile platform for rich content creations. However, it's very productive. So for the daily workflow of most knowledge workers, it just sits on knowledge workers' desktop. So if it's been an issue in the past in the life sciences industry when companies asked their knowledge workers and authors to use multiple different tools. They don't want to learn different tools. So Word is still there. It's reality. And the reality also with Word is that Microsoft is investing very heavily in AI-powered features and third-party apps for assistive authoring. So it's still there. We believe it's going to be around for a while. But there is an re-emerging area for XM editors. And what is really important about XM editors is XM editors can work with the FHIR schema. Word cannot. Word actually was there was a time when Microsoft was adopting Word to different schemas, but for a variety of reasons, it's no longer supported. So it's very important to note that XM editors can work with the FHIR schema. Word cannot. There are some limitations with XM editors. The rich formatting support, I just talked about that earlier. They have limited rich formatting support. So unless regulatory agencies or companies are willing to relax their formatting standards, there's going to be discrepancy between what Word offers and XM editors offer. Most XM editors, especially, well, the ones that are practically easy to use, that are browser-based, they don't really have or any or very limited offline support. And there's other capabilities that companies use all the time when authoring content in Word, which is one is co-authoring, so real-time co-authoring where multiple people can work on the same content at the same time. This actually requires a huge global infrastructure for syncing, and it's very difficult for small companies to implement this. And there's right now one of the areas that FHIR lacks in is annotations. So XML can handle annotations, but due to a particular schema, but for example, there's no current FHIR standard for annotations. So, for example, even a doctor who wants to add notes to a FHIR-based visit report cannot do that because there was an initiative to develop annotations, but it has not. At this point, it has not progressed any further to the point where a common standard could be established. So, how do we resolve this? And the way we're resolving this is we're basically making XML first-class citizens, so to say, in our platform, and to have them coexist. So use the rich content platform for Word, for what it's good at, for rich content as well as co-authoring scenarios, and we found a way to convert the Word XML standard to FHIR XML standard in real time. And it's also possible to actually have these coexist and exchange information in a bidirectional manner. So the key here is to be able to reuse content components between legacy Word documents and FHIR-based standard. We believe this is a practical approach, and in a way, it meets the requirements of both the legacy authoring environments as well as the new methods. There's also another thing I should really mention is that today a lot of the additional workflow processes are still using Word. For example, the traditional label negotiating processes. So when a company sends a label for approval, a USPI label for approval to the FDA actually also has Word on their desktops, and they basically look at the document, they make comments on the document or request changes. All that is captured in Word. It would be very difficult due to a lack of common standards today to replace that with a pure XML-based workflow due to a lack of annotations and offline support and all those other things. So for this reason, it seems very reasonable to make the two coexist with each other. So this is just a brief illustration of how we see the world of XML and or Word and FHIR XML. So we can manage semi-structured and structured data in our platform. We create a FHIR compliant XML manifest that's then converted into XML. And by applying a style sheet, we can convert it to EPI. And most importantly, these two are synced. So whenever there's changes in the label, it can be sent back to the source Word document. We believe, again, it's not easy, it's complex, but it's practical because this leaves the content where it is. It gives authors in both sides of the world the tools to use the tool that makes sense for the task at hand. So in our opinion, FHIR will increasingly replace legacy formats, including the XML-based formats like SPL, structured product labeling for regulatory submissions. We believe that the eCTD4, in fact, we know the eCTD4 is proceeding. Eventually, it's going to be fused with FHIR-based content, replacing some legacy formats. But it's still going to be necessary to support legacy formats for a while. And also, let's not forget that while life sciences organizations and sponsors and regulatory authorities are very interested in exchanging data as data instead of using e-paper as an intermediary, patients don't really care so much about that. Patients still want PDF or paper. IRBs, institutional review boards, they also want that. So legacy formats will be around for a while, we believe, and the key is how to bridge these technologies so there will be minimal disruption to existing workflows. So having said that, I've come to the conclusion of the presentation piece of today's webinar. Thank you for your attention, and we still have plenty of time for questions, so please go ahead. So Steve, if you wanted to open up for questions, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. And Gabor, thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm just gathering a couple things here and getting the recording stopped.